Human activity could destroy planet Earth as we know it. The air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat.
The current state of the biosphere is not good, but first perhaps I should explain what we mean by the biosphere, which consists of the oceans, including the ocean floor, all the land masses, the atmosphere and the stratosphere, and this contains all of the life and living systems that we understand to be part of planet Earth. So the current state of this biosphere relates to what we call the ecosystems in the biosphere, which is how all of the living organisms, the various species in their various places, interact with each other. Ecosystems in the biosphere have, over the last many years, been deteriorating. That is to say that the ecosystems have less energy, have been breaking down, many of them have less resilience than they had before. By that we mean that they are less able to rectify and recover themselves if they receive shocks. I should say at the outset that the biosphere is by no means stable and is not intended to be stable. Nature is not stable in that sense. It is dynamic, always shifting and changing. If left to its own devices, will always recover a state that has been upset or move to another one which is in some sense better for the ecosystems. Now these ecosystems of the biosphere have been have suffered intervention from human activity for many, many years, thousands of years in fact, but especially over the last 200, 250 years, since the Industrial Revolution began, and at the same time a population, Earth population of human beings began to increase substantially. And all of these, what I'm calling human interventions, things that human beings do as a part of their living, many of them anyway, have had a quite harmful effect on those ecosystems. This is probably the key questions. What are the harmful effects and where have they come from? There are many of them. It's quite complicated. We won't go into all of them here now. There are three, perhaps four, that really stand out. One of them is that human beings have been, to be a bit in the vernacular about it, have been messing around with the carbon cycle. And a lot of us see this as putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That is exactly at the root of the issue. The essential point, though, is that we're putting more carbon dioxide into it than can be utilised by the plants which use carbon dioxide. We're referring to here the carbon cycle, where carbon in the atmosphere is absorbed by plants, turned into nutrients that the plants can use, and incidentally a lot of that can become food to human beings as well as other animals especially, but fish as well. And so the carbon dioxide is converted and oxygen is released by these plants. It's an essential part of life on Earth, as most of us will know. Carbon cycle can be upset and has been upset by an excess of carbon dioxide being released by human living, and we'll come to the reasons for that in a moment. And that excessive carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere, and so the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been increasing. Where has that carbon dioxide come from? Well, the greater part of it, by far the greater part, has come from the burning, in scientific terms it's oxidization, of solid carbon or gaseous carbon. So we're talking here about oil, which has been extracted, coal which has been extracted, or natural gas, and the process of combusting those materials leads to carbon dioxide, as well as a lot of other gases being released as well, carbon monoxide among them. There are other contributors to carbon dioxide, but those are the main ones, and from a sustainability point of view, those are the major ones that we need to address. Interestingly, the carbon that comes from animals is, in my view anyway, much less important, because all that is about is actually a speeding up of the carbon cycle. It is not new carbon, it is just carbon that is cycling through the natural systems, in this case animals, faster than it otherwise would have done. That's an important distinction to make. So, human beings have intervened in the carbon cycle and have got that out of balance. What else? Well, there are two other cycles which are really important to recognise. One is the nitrogen cycle, and the other one is relates to phosphorus. Both of these have been severely disrupted by human activity, and one of them is the creation of what is called active nitrification. There is a great deal of nitrogen, of course, in the atmosphere, and it's essentially harmless, but it is essential. But there are processes by which nitrogen is turned into nitrates and nitrites, which essentially go into the soils and the water systems and change the ecosystems in the water systems and in the soils and degrade them severely. And that has been going on at a great rate, particularly in agriculture and horticulture, and as a part of food production in the main, coming from application of fertilisers. And the application of fertilisers changes the structure of soils, and so the amount of nitrogen which can be fixed in the soils and used by the plants reduces, and as a result of that, more of it gets through into the groundwater and streams and so on, and eventually we see it polluting streams, lakes, we get algal blooms, and it affects the oceans as well. The intervention in the nitrogen cycle has also released a lot of nitrogen gases, particularly nitrous oxide, into the atmosphere, and that has effects somewhat similar to the carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, a so-called greenhouse gas. The intervention in phosphorus is, with the phosphorus cycle, is somewhat linked with the nitrogen one, but this again relates primarily to agriculture and food production, where phosphatic fertilisers have been applied to land, and most of this has, in the first instance, been highly beneficial to the plants that have been grown, absolutely necessary in fact. But over-application of these fertilisers has resulted in runoffs of phosphates into streams and waterways and into the ocean, and has changed the ecologies in those water, in that water, as a result of which the habitat for fish and many other species has been changed. I'm making a particular point of nitrogen and phosphorus because the carbon dioxide one that I mentioned earlier is the one that is associated with global warming and climate change, and that is serious. There is scientific evidence coming through right now, however, showing or suggesting that the human interventions, largely through agriculture and application of fertiliser, in the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle, is at least as severe as the intervention with carbon, climate change, and the impact of it may well come earlier. So these are important matters that science has, if you like, been a little slow in catching up with, and certainly public awareness and the public debate doesn't know much about these other effects yet at all. These, the phosphorus and nitrogen questions are particularly important to New Zealand, of course, because New Zealand agriculture, particularly the pastoral industries, the really important ones, dairy, sheep, beef, deer and so on, have been major users and appliers of these fertilisers. And essentially the degradation therefore of the waterways is already severe and is accelerating. So there we've got the three major influences. There is a fourth one that I'll mention in terms of the current state of the biosphere, and that relates to human intervention with what is often called biodiversity. that word needs to be unpicked a bit. It really means that we're cutting down, mostly we're cutting down a lot of forests, and as a part of human economic activity, or maybe just to obtain firewood. But anyway, the forests are coming down and are being replaced by other ecosystems on that land. Sometimes it's pastures, sometimes it's jungle being cut to put in palm trees. Sometimes it just becomes a wasteland and desert, but the ecology changes, and what is lost is what is called the sink, which is the opportunity for trees to absorb carbon dioxide and really hold it within the tree structures for many, many years, and that doesn't happen anymore. There are other elements of biodiversity as well, in that as ecosystems become less diverse, that is, they become more like monocultures, or there are just a few plants or animals in each one, far fewer than before, then they lose their resilience, and shocks can literally destroy them, whereas when they were in their earlier state, they could ride out those shocks, maybe get changed a bit, but they would remain quite healthy. So that has been lost as well. I think in terms of where we are, I've gone far enough, but we can expand on that if you wish.